Welcome back to In Response EDH. As always, I'm your host Albert, and I'm glad you can join us for another great Commander gameplay video. On today's episode, we have Chris S making his debut on the channel, and he's brought with him Kess, Dissident Mage. This deck is a Dragon's Approach deck, so it contains cards that are pretty much unplayable outside of a Dragon's Approach deck. These are used to find more approaches or copy approaches and burn the table out of the game. He starts the game off with Demonic Tutor, 2 Dragon's Approaches, 3 Mountains, and an Island. Next, we welcome back Derek to the table, and he'll be playing one of his newest decks, led by Vazi, Keen Negotiator. This deck aims to benefit off of making himself and others treasure tokens, which in turn will become card draw for him. He wants to control the board in the early game and drop tons of creatures that will have him swimming in treasure. He decides to keep an opening hand with Toxic Deluge, Terror Sunder, Dryad's Revival, Hissing Quagmire, an Exotic Orchard, and 2 Mountains. Pax has made his way back to the channel, and he's playing a fun commander I've yet to play against, Inferno of the Star Mount. 20 is the magic number he wants his commander's power to be, because when it is, he'll be dealing huge chunks of damage to everyone at the table. So as you may have guessed, this deck runs a lot of ways to pump up his commander, and quite a few ways to generate extra mana to dump into his fire-breathing ability. Today he decides to keep a Bolt Bend, Urabrask Heretic Praetor, Endless Atlas, Bonder's Enclave, and 3 snow-covered mountains. And lastly, there's me. I'll be bringing Muldrotha back out for a spin. This is one of my favorite decks to play. It wants to fill my graveyard with goodies to recur with Muldrotha later on, and like most of my other decks, can win through an infinite turns combo. That's just what I like to do, don't hate me for it. I decided to keep an opening hand with Arcane Signet, Spellskite, Sakura Tribe Elder, Kaya's Ghost Form, the God Eternal Kefnet, Zagoth Triumph, and an Underground Stadium. Before we get started, we would like to remind you, if you enjoy our content and would like to support the channel, consider becoming a patron. When you do, you're not only contributing to the channel's growth, but you're also being entered in our monthly giveaways, as well as receiving patron-only perks. All proceeds of our Patreon are reinvested back into the channel to bring you the best content possible. We would also like to thank our sponsor, Dragon Shield. Hit the link in the description of this video to check out the best product out there to protect your cardboard. You can also support the channel by using our affiliate link when purchasing product and singles at TCG Player. With that said, and the introductions out of the way, let's start the game. Pax wins the die roll and starts the game, playing a snow-covered mountain. I then play a tapped Zagoth Triumph and pass to Chris. Chris then starts by playing a Blightstep Pathway and passes. Derek then plays a tapped Hissing Quagmire and passes back to Pax. Pax draws and then plays another snow-covered mountain. He then taps both lands to cast an Endless Atlas. I draw for turn and drop an Undergrowth Stadium on the field, then tap both lands to cast Sakura Tribe Elder and pass. Chris then plays a tapped Izzet Guildgate and ends his turn. Derek plays an Exotic Orchard as his land drop and taps both lands to cast a Reckless Fireweaver. Pax then drops another Snow Mountain on the field and passes. Alright, I'm gonna sack Steve.
Yep.
No, Steve! I search up an island to my board and start my turn. I then draw a card and drop a Jeweled Lotus on the field for free. I then tap my lands for Soul Tie and sacrifice my Jeweled Lotus for 3 mana to cast my commander, Muldrotha the Gravetide. I then recast the Jeweled Lotus for my graveyard with my commander. Next, I drop a Phyrexian Tower as my land for turn and pass. Chris then draws and plays a command tower. He then taps out to cast the first Dragon's Approach of the game. The table then takes 3 damage, and he passes to Derek. Derek then draws and plays a Swamp. On his end step, Pax pays 2 mana to activate the Walking Atlas, and draws a card. He then untaps and draws for turn. He plays a Bonder's Enclave as his land drop, and taps 2 mana to suspend one of his pet cards, Rousing Refrain, which gets suspended with 3 time counters on it. He then passes to me. I draw my card for the turn, and then tap my Stadium for black mana, to cast Kaya's Ghost Form on Muldrotha. After that, I go to combat and swing Muldrotha at Pax for 6 commander damage. On my second main phase, I tap the rest of my mana to cast Heuristic Study. With the spell on the stack, Derek casts Tear Asunder, targeting my Kaya's ghost form to exile it. I miss a land draw for this turn and just pass to Chris. Chris then plays a tap Dimir Guildgate and decides to tap 2 mana to cast Demonic Tutor, paying the 1 for the Heuristic Study. He then goes searching for a card and passes. Derek draws his card for turn and plays a Mountain. He then taps out, paying 1 extra for the study tax to cast Dryad's Revival to return the Tear Asunder from his graveyard to his hand. On his end step, Pax once again activates the Endless Atlas to draw a card. He then untaps, and on his upkeep, removes a time counter from the Rousing Refrain. He then draws for turn and drops another Snow Mountain as his land drop. He then taps all his mana to cast Urabrask, Heretic Praetor. He can't pay for the study tax, and I get to draw a card. He then swings Urabrask at me for 4 damage and passes. I untap, and instead of drawing a card, I exile the top of my library, which is a Mana Crypt. I then play the Mana Crypt and use the 2 mana from it to pay for a Spellskite. I then pay another 2 mana to cast Arcane Signet. I follow that up by tapping 2 more mana to cast Steve again from my graveyard. After that, I go to combat and swing my commander at Derek. He chooses not to block and takes 6 commander damage. Chris then exiles a Dragon's Approach off the top of his deck, thanks to Urabrask. He then puts a Mountain into play and taps out to cast his commander, Kess, Dissident Mage, paying an extra 1 for the study tax. Derek then draws his card and plays a land. He then remembers to exile the card he drew, which is a Blood Money. He can't cast it, so it just stays in exile. After that, Derek casts a Toxic Deluge, paying 6 life and 1 more mana for the study tax. In response, I sacrifice Steve again to search up another island to the field. The Deluge then resolves and wipes the board. After that, Derek taps the Orchard for red mana and casts a Vandal Blast, targeting my Jeweled Lotus. He can't pay for the tax this time, and I draw a card. Paxton untaps and removes another time counter from the Rousing Refrain. He then draws for turn and plays another Snow Mountain as his land drop. Paxton pays 3 mana to cast Lightning Greaves, paying for the study tax. With nothing else, he ends his turn. I start my turn rolling for the Crypt and not taking any damage. I then draw for turn and play a Fabled Passage. I immediately crack it and go searching for a forest. I then tap 8 mana to bring Muldrotha back out. I then choose to recast the Jeweled Lotus again out of my graveyard, and with nothing else, I end my turn. Chris draws and plays another Mountain. He then taps all 6 mana to recast his commander, Kess. He is unable to pay for the study tax, so I draw a card. Derek then draws for turn and drops a Zyatora's Proving Ground on the field. After that, he taps 5 mana to kick Tear Asunder, paying for the tax, to exile Muldrotha. And now I'm starting to really feel disrespected. On his end step, Pax activates the Atlas again to draw a card. He then starts his turn and removes the final time counter from Rousing Refrain and casts it. It exiles itself again with 3 more counters. And Pax gets to add 5 red mana to his mana pool since I have 5 cards in hand. I then remind him of the study tax and he pays for it. He plays another snow-covered mountain and decides it's now time to cast his commander, Inferno of the Star Mounts, paying an additional 1 for the tax. He follows that up by casting Claws of Valakut, targeting his commander, giving it +6/+0. He then moves to equip the Greaves to it. After that, he goes to combat and swings the dragon at Chris, who chooses not to block and takes 12 commander damage. I finally remembered my study trigger from the claws and draw a card. I then draw for turn, losing 3 to the Mana Crypt, and play a Dreamroot Cascade. After that, I cast a God Eternal Kefnet to give me some protection in the air. I then follow that up by casting River Kelpie. With nothing else, I end my turn. Chris then draws his card and uses Kess's static ability to recast the Demonic Tutor from the graveyard. He does pay for the study tax, but I do get to draw from the River Kelpie since he cast a card from the graveyard. He then goes searching for a card, which is Collected Conjuring. Not paying for the tax, but I forget to draw. He then reveals the top 6 cards of his library and gets to choose 2 sorceries with CMC 3 or less to cast for free. He hits 2 Dragon's Approaches and a Winged Words from among them. Chris decides to cast the Dragon's Approach to deal 3 to each of us, and Winged Words to draw 2 cards. He can't pay the taxes on either spell, and I get to draw 2 cards as well. After he draws, he just ends his turn. Derek then starts his turn and plays a forest as his land drop. He then casts the card he drew, which is a Fellwar Stone. He then taps out, paying the extra 1 to cast Vazi, Keen Negotiator.
Because I'm just gonna have her out there to die.
On his end step, Pax again draws a card with the Atlas and then starts his turn. He then removes another time counter from the Rousing Refrain and draws for turn. Pax taps 2 mana to cast Reckless Impulse to exile the top 2 cards of his library, which he can play until the end of his next turn. He chooses not to pay the tax, and I get to draw a card. Pax then plays one of the exiled lands as his land drop, and then goes to combat, swinging his commander at me. Even though I really don't want to, I block with Kefnet to save myself from potentially getting one-shotted. And on Pax's end step, I cast a Vampiric Tutor, losing 2 life, and searching a card to the top of my library. I start by rolling for the Mana Crypt and taking another 3 damage. I untap and draw for turn. After that, I cast a Plaguecrafter.
Oh, son of a biscuit either.
Bye, Kess.
Everyone then sacks their only creature, and I sack the Plaguecrafter. I then move to combat and swing River Kelpie at Pax for 3. On my second main, I play a Rejuvenating Springs as my land drop. I follow that up by casting a Seal of Primordium, and follow that by casting a Dauthi Voidwalker.
Voidwalker. Oh boy.
Dauthi Voidwalker.
Very nice.
Chris then starts his turn.
He only had 1 creature each. You said it. I'm just gonna put her out there so she'll die. Oh, Derek. I'm sorry.
He then plays another tap land, a Crumbling Necropolis. He then taps 3 mana, paying 1 extra for the tax, to cast a Talisman of Creativity. With nothing else, he passes. Derek then draws for turn, and taps out to recast Vazi, paying the additional 1 for the Rhystic Study. He then moves to combat and swings 3 commander damage at Pax. On his end step, Pax continues to get a ton of value off the Atlas and draws another card. He then taps out to cast Commune with Lava where X equals 2, and I forget to draw a card off the Rhystic Study. He then reveals a Vandal Blast and a Natali Primal Storm. On his upkeep, the Rousing Refrain loses another time counter, and Pax draws for turn. He starts by playing the other Exiled Mountain as his land drop, and then taps 6 to cast Atali Primal Storm. Pax decides not to pay the tax, and I draw a card. Pax then moves to equip the Lightning Greaves to Atali, but I respond by sacrificing the Seal of Primordium, targeting the Greaves. In response, Pax casts Bolt Bend, paying the extra for the study tax, to redirect the target to my Rhystic Study instead. He then equips Atali with the Greaves and goes to combat, swinging at Chris to even out the life totals. We then exile the top cards of our library, revealing 3 lands and a Ramunap Excavator. He then casts it, and follows that up by hurting me some more, casting Vandal Blast to get rid of my Jeweled Lotus. I then start my turn, reminding Pax that all those cards he cast are now exiled with the Dauthi Voidwalker. Now that we're all caught up with that, I lose 3 life from losing my Mana Crypt roll. I then recast my commander, and replay the Jeweled Lotus out of my graveyard. I then tap the Crypt to cast Spellskite as my creature from the graveyard. And then recast the Seal of Primordium. Since I cast 3 spells from the graveyard, River Kelpie would draw me 3 cards. I then move to combat and swing the Kelpie and the Voidwalker at Pax. Pax decides to block the Kelpie with the Excavator and takes 3 damage. After that, I end my turn. Chris then starts by casting Jeska's Will, adding 7 red mana to his mana pool, and it gets exiled under the Dauthi Voidwalker. He uses 6 of it and taps a blue and a black to cast his commander again. He then recasts the Winged Words from the graveyard to draw 2 cards. And I also draw a card off the Kelpie. He follows that up by casting an Imperial Seal, which will also get exiled under the Voidwalker. Chris then loses 2 life and goes searching up a card to the top of his library. He then puts a Swiftwater Cliffs on the battlefield and gains a life as it enters.
Derek then starts his turn, playing a Cinderglade as his land drop. After that, he moves to combat, swinging Vazi at Pax again for another 3 commander damage. He follows that up by flashing back the Dryad's Revival in his graveyard.
Alright. I just put a card on top of the library and he has...
I'm gonna draw.
Italy.
Oh, how good is it?
It's not good for him. It's useless
okay.
for him.
Okay, but it's good for you.
It would be. It would have been, yeah.
Derek then returns a Toxic Deluge back to his hand and casts it, paying 6 life to try and wipe the board, but I respond with a Fierce Guardianship to counter it. It then gets exiled with the Voidwalker. With nothing else, he passes. Turn 10 starts with Pax again, casting the Rousing Refrain and putting 3 more time counters on it. This time he adds 8 red mana, since I currently have 8 cards in hand. He then spends that mana and 5 more to cast Bonfire of the Damned, where X equals 6 to deal 6 damage to me and Muldrotha, but I respond by casting Force of Will, exiling a Baleful Strix and losing a life. Pax continues his hate for me by casting Mizzium Mortars to deal 4 damage to the Dothy Voidwalker.
This game's
man.
Maybe not if he gets a good card off the top.
Paxton goes to combat and points at Chris at first, but quickly changes his mind and chooses me. I make a big mistake here and block before the Italy trigger.
There you go.
Oh, I got Troll Space.
Look at that!
Shoot.
Look at that Thrumming Stone.
Agent of Treachery!
Oh.
Shroud. Oh, he can cast
Still
it.
that
though.
Muldrotha.
Yeah,
So you also get Thrumming Stone. Not gonna help you.
Oh.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
That is freaking nuts.
Oh my goodness. Alright. Paxton goes to his end step and draws 3 cards with the Agent of Treachery. I then start my turn, again losing 3 life from the Mana Crypt, and then cast a Coma, Cosmos Serpent. Followed by an Elvish Visionary, drawing a card as it enters. I then sacrifice a seal to blow up the Greaves, and before he gets to recast it with Muldrotha, I play a Bojuka Bog to exile his graveyard. After that, I cast Azusa, Lost But Seeking, and play a Misty Rainforest as my second land drop, and then play a Basic Forest as my third land drop. I then crack my fetch, losing 1 life, to search up a Sunken Hollow to the battlefield. I then tap it for black mana to cast a Viscera Seer. After that, I move to combat and swing the River Kelpie at Derek for 3. After that, I pass the turn. On Chris's upkeep, I make a Coma Coil, and he draws for turn. He then plays a Mountain, which is blocked by the overlay, and Chris then taps 3 to cast a Gutter Snipe. He follows that up by casting a Spellweaver Helix. When it enters, he exiles 2 sorceries from his graveyard, those being a Dragon's Approach and Collected Conjuring. So Pax makes a last-ditch effort to look for an answer with the Atlas.
Shatter or Mana Blast. Nope.
Chris then casts a Dragon's Approach, and we all take 3, which will actually be 5 with the Gutter Snipe. This will allow him to cast a copy of the Collected Conjuring, dealing 2 more damage from the Gutter Snipe. He then exiles the next 6 cards, finding and casting another Dragon's Approach, dealing another 5 to us. This allows him to make another copy of the Collected Conjuring, and the Gutter Snipe damage takes both me and Derek out. He then exiles the top 6 again, and finds and casts another Dragon's Approach. This will deal the last points of damage to Pax, and Chris wins the game. Well, congratulations to Chris on getting his first win on the channel, and burning us all out of the game with a spicy little combo. The interaction between cards like Spellweaver Helix, Thrumming Stone, and Pyromancer's Ascension with Dragon's Approach is really cool. And like I said at the beginning of the episode, these cards don't see any play outside of these approach style decks, so it's great to see them put to use. Chris did let us know he had to sandbag the win a bit, since I was keeping him at bay with the Seal of Primordium, but as soon as I sacked it to get rid of Pax's Lightning Greaves, he was able to finally pull the trigger and win. My deck performed very well, but I feel like I made too many mistakes piloting it that cost me the game. I was too worried about getting one shot killed by Pax, and the turn where I blocked and put the Spellskite into the graveyard before resolving the Italy trigger was rough, since I could have used the Spellskite to redirect the Agent of Treachery, ETB, to steal the Spellskite instead of my commander. This would have allowed me to replay the Seal of Primordium and possibly keep Chris from going off that last turn. But oh wells, I just gotta play smarter next time. Plus, it was 2 AM when we filmed this game, so there's always that excuse. Derek just struggled the entire night while playing Vazi. The deck runs 32 creatures, and literally half of them make treasures, but you wouldn't be able to tell that by this game. He may have not had a huge board presence, but his ability to keep me having to rebuild early in the game and having me spend counters in the late game to save my board is a big reason why I didn't just run away with the game. Thanks a lot, Derek. Pax, on the other hand, had a great showing. he gained a ton of card advantage off the Endless Atlas the entire game. He also did his best to keep my board clear, but casting my own Agent of Treachery and stealing my commander stung the most. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't keep his commander on the field long enough to get him to 20 power and knocking someone out of the game. So hopefully next time we see Pax and the Inferno on the channel, he can change that. If you enjoyed this game, consider stopping by our Twitch streams for Salty Tier Tuesdays every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and Fridays at 7 Pacific Standard Time for live Commander action. Make sure to like the video and leave a comment, and if you aren't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Before we go, we'd like to give a big thank you to our amazing patrons. We are glad to have your support and thankful for each and every one of you. We here at In Response would like to thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you follow us on our social medias. We also stream every Friday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for watching. Have an awesome day.